So we're back in the same series here of difficult questions that a particular financial institution was having come in that they just couldn't answer. So in this particular question, a difficult question oftentimes is you've got a higher net worth client that has a capability to buy a property for cash, and they can't determine whether to liquidate assets and pay cash for the property or borrow instead and leave that money working for them, say in an investment account. So what we're going to use here for this particular example is it's a second home purchase. We just picked that from our drop down list here. $400,000 contract price. My title for my reminder is Buy Beach Condo for $400,000. We're going to use the same kind of general setup here. Mr. and Mrs. Self-directed, $125,000 income, 25% bracket and email. So no change there. We don't need to add any current liabilities since this is a purchase and this client has no other current liabilities other than a primary mortgage. But given that we're just simply going to address, do I pay cash or borrow, I want to keep this as clean as possible. Why add additional variables if they don't help me answer the specific question that's being stated? So the clients want to buy a beach condo for $400,000 and they want to understand if they should borrow equity from their home using a HELOC for the down payment with a new mortgage, or liquidate $400,000 in assets from their savings. All right, so what we're going to basically show here, and now we just simply set that up and go to the borrow page. I've collapsed current liabilities. Again, there are none, so why have anything showing that's not necessary? I could pay cash. It's a $400,000 property and a $400,000 contract price, and by paying cash, I have no borrowing, so my loan amount is zero. This is a purchase, so it's going to calculate, okay, if you buy a house for $400,000 and have no loan amount, you're going to need to bring $400,000 to the closing table. My alternative is to borrow 80% with a HELOC. So this particular financial institution, you'll notice I've got a $400,000 property value and a $400,000 contract price. The client was interested in keeping this forever, paying it off, leaving it to their kids. This is a 30-year fixed at 80%, which is what they would lend on a second home. That gives us a loan amount of $320,000. They wanted to use a 4 1/4 30-year fix. That was the rate at that particular time. And then they would also provide them a 30-year term HELOC with a 10-year draw period to 90%. So in other words, they could do another 10%, or in this case, $40,000 on HELOC. Now that HELOC is 3.990 right now. That's the start rate, and obviously it could go up or down over time. And of course we can click on the thing here, and I've set this up. This particular lender, it was a fixed rate for 12 months. After that, it can adjust once a month up to a life cap of 10% over the start rate, and that's based on prime plus 0. So I've got my index of right now is at 3 1/4 and a margin of 0, and that's prime. And again, I always want to use a worst case scenario when I look at something like this over time. So that's my setup here, and you can see if I pay cash, I know intuitively I'm going to have a lot of cash out of pocket. If I borrow at 80% with a HELOC, I know that I'm looking at basically getting 90%. I'm going to have to come to the closing table with the difference here about $40,000. The other difference I can see already is that I have no payment here, and I'm having a payment of about $1,707 here. But that doesn't tell me a whole lot. I need to be able to explain to the client the financial impact. And I always go through the same process of first the closing cost impact. If you buy this house and pay cash, you'll need $400,000 to pay cash for the property. You won't have an origination fee, right? So we can go ahead and take that. That was just a default that we had in there. And let's just say the closing costs are going to be around $1,500 if they're buying it with cash. So you're going to need around $401,500 out of pocket at closing. That's going to have to come from somewhere, your investment account. But we're assuming you have 4015 to be able to do this transaction. Sorry, 401500. That's money you have available to be able to do this. And if you have 4015 for a cash purchase, you would also have 4015 for a borrowing purchase. So what this is allowing us to do here is by showing the cash available, if I pay cash at $400,500, I'm going to need that out of pocket. I have nothing left over. But I'm going to see that that's going to save me a lot in my payment here. I'm going to have no monthly payment. So that means my cash flow is such that I have a 0 monthly payment commitment. Here, I'm going to need to bring $40,000 as my down payment, plus an origination fee, plus some closing costs. So I'll need about $43,725. Again, I always want to keep apples to apples. I have 4015 available. That's going to leave me $357,775. So either of these two scenarios, they communicate just one of two things. Either you come to the closing table with $401,000, have no cash left over, or you're out that amount, or you come to the closing table with $43,725 and you have $357,775 to invest or to leave invested. So then our second question is, if either of those are optional, what does a cash flow impact look like here? Well, if I pay cash, again, I have no out-of-pocket expense. We would have taxes and insurance, so we can put those in. But again, that's not relative. The taxes, insurance are the same whether they pay cash or they borrow. So again, I always want to keep it as clean as I possibly can. If I borrow $360,000 total, and I'm borrowing that on both a fixed portion and a HELOC at 3.99, it's going to adjust. I know my initial payment is going to be $1,707, and that's going to vary over time once the HELOC adjusts, but that's my payment coming out. So I know my baseline here is what? 0 versus $1,707. So I could say this in two different ways. I have no cash and no monthly cash flow to worry about, or I keep $357,775 and I need to pay $1,707 minimum out of pocket to cover that debt. I've communicated some important things here, but the one thing that is impossible really to communicate clearly to the client is what's the financial impact of these decisions over time. In this case, over 30 years that I hold this property. And that's where the wealth impact here really shines, because what I'm able to do is take their assumptions and say, all right, we're going to assume that you spend the same amount each month out of pocket, $1,707.21, and by doing fixed, this is going to automatically adjust to the minimum fixed payment that they have to make. So as that arm goes up, this payment will actually go up behind the scenes, and this payment will match it so that we're investing the same amount that they would be paying over here. So at closing, I'm able to make a $357.75 investment. I do that by just saying, let's put $357.75 at closing into a savings account, because I need to do something with that cash. Now, the time frame's 30 years. We assume the property appreciation is 2%. Let's make that 0, because it doesn't really matter. It's the same property. But the after-tax savings rate is important. And this particular financial institution said use 7%, because that's what we would use if we were doing projections on asset growth. So now the real question here, again, I always like to get to 3 critical numbers. What's the cash impact? You're going to have no cash in pocket or $357,775 left over. What's the cash flow impact? You have no monthly payment, or you're going to spend $1,707 a month on a relative basis. That's coming out of pocket. Okay, what do I really want to know? I want to know what the financial impact, which of these decisions is best for me over time? Well, I can go right to my net number here, and it's green, $432,219. So what that tells me, and these are expanded here, I can collapse them, is that over this 30-year time period, I'm going to spend $2,082,000 if I pay cash over time. It's going to cost me $2.5 million over here because of the interest and the other stuff. But you'll notice, I'm sorry, you're going to have a savings balance. If I invest the $1,707.21 for 30 years at 7%, it's going to grow to $2 million. If I leave the $357,775 invested at 7%, it's going to grow to $2.514. When that HELOC payment starts to go up, we take that money out of the savings account so that we can show a net number here. And I can see the difference here in terms of the cash and the net equity is $432,219. The house value is $400 either way, so we're leaving that the same by using this at 0. But I can look and even see dynamically if the client said, well, what if I only earned 6% in my investment account over that, or let's just say 5.5%. All right, how much better would I be off over that particular time period? And we can recalculate that and see what that looks like. If I drop that down to 5%, you'll see that it's a negative number. So this client needs to earn 5% or more to avoid being break even. At 6%, I'm up $115,000. At 7%, as we saw there, we were at 432. This particular advisor said, my target over 30 years is going to be 8.5%. Well, again, depending on what you want to model there, if you were to earn an 8.5% return, this is a $1 million decision. But there's risk because we don't know what the actual return is going to be. But we do know that if they can earn a 7% return over time, they are much better off. If they were going to put that money in a checking account at 2% or a money market at 2%, this is going to cost them $355,118 over 30 years to borrow this 90% in this way compared to just paying cash. But if I'm an advisor, I'm a client, and I feel confident over the next 30 years I can earn 7% on my money, then one way to look at this is I just got a free condo because my condo cost is $400,000, and just the financial value of this advice from the advisor is such that if we can hit this target, 7% over 30 years net, then I have an extra $432,000 that I wouldn't have had if I bought a $400,000 condo and paid cash. And that is a great way to show the value of your financial advice. Click on the present page, and I would probably, again, I might want to go with more of a 5-page financial summary here because I can show the ARM details for the HELOC. And again, this is showing a worst case scenario on that HELOC, right? If that HELOC isn't as bad as we think, but this will go through and show the cash impact on one page so you can make notes on it. I like the 5-page for this type of presentation because it allows me to stretch the data out and create a lot of white space so the advisor or the client can make notes on each of these. I have no payment versus 1707, the wealth impact, the 432 based on these variables. I can see sort of the proposed liabilities here, the 30-year fix and the HELOC. I can even see the ARM assumptions because, again, what we're assuming here is a worst case based on this thing jumping up here to the worst possible payment that could happen over the term. Again, I don't think this is likely to happen, but we're showing that $432,000 savings in a worst case scenario, and we are in fact providing the AM tables that allow them to see how those numbers actually work out over time. So a much more complicated and sophisticated case, but again, the ability to very easily model anything the client might want to understand, and even to understand that break-even point by sliding the sliders along here and saying, hey, at what point, what is my break-even? What would I really need to earn in my account for this to be at least a break-even for me? And you see positive $18. So they need to earn 5.5% in that account. That's based on a 4.25 HELOC and the fixed and the HELOC going to the maximum possible rate that it could. Again, very unlikely, more likely that they have a much higher overall savings, but I like to be as conservative as I can with these examples.